Just tell me which members of the court you are bought.
I did not think that Justice Clarence Thomas should be failing to disclose his trips on a billionaire's
Do you think
yacht
he's
and
bought?
airplane.
Do you think he's
I
bought?
believe that there is grave risk.
Do you think he's bought?
I said there is grave risk
Do you think he's bought?
to the confidence of the American people in our Supreme
Well, if you
Court.
don't think he's bought, why did you say it?
I said
Yes,
that there is.
you said members of the Supreme Court are bought. You're here testifying as an expert for my Democratic friends, and you're saying the members of the Supreme Court are bought?
I said when the American people feel that way when we have Supreme Court justices
feel that way?
on yachts and in planes of billionaires and not being disclosed.
Anybody
financial
besides Justice Thomas you think is bought on the Supreme Court?
I believe
Professor Painter, on May 5th of this year, you put out a tweet. You said, I'm going to quote, "There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's the Supreme Court." Would you tell me which members of the Supreme Court you believe are bought?
I was particularly concerned at that point when I posted that tweet.
I
about,
understand, but if you could, I've got really limited time, and I apologize for interrupting. Just tell me which members of the court you are bought.
I did not think that Justice Clarence Thomas should be failing to disclose his trips on a billionaire's
Do you think
yacht
he's
and
bought?
airplane.
Do you think he's
I
bought?
believe that there is grave risk.
Do you think he's bought?
I said there is grave risk
Do you think he's bought?
to the confidence of the American people in our Supreme
Well, if you
Court.
don't think he's bought, why did you say it?
I said
Yes,
that there is.
you said members of the Supreme Court are bought. You're here testifying as an expert for my Democratic friends, and you're saying the members of the Supreme Court are bought?
I said when the American people feel that way when we have Supreme Court
you
justices
feel that way?
on yachts and in planes of billionaires and not being disclosed.
Anybody
financial
besides Justice Thomas you think is bought on the Supreme Court?
I believe that the court needs to clean
Anybody
up
besides
its act.
Justice Thomas?
I'm not going to go through each
I mean,
justice.
you tweeted it.
I tweeted the way the American people
Did
feel.
you mean
the
it
way
when
I
you
feel.
tweeted it?
And I stand by that tweet. This Supreme Court of the United States
right.
needs to clean up its
Let me
act.
ask you a couple others here, because you've on September 17, 2020, you tweeted, "It looks like Putin's favorite senator could lose," referring to Senator Lindsey Graham. Could you tell me your evidence for saying that Senator Graham is President Putin's favorite senator?
I don't recall that tweet and the story.
Well, I've got it.
that
It's
was tweeted
right
out.
here. It's right here.
I'm happy to look at the tweet, and I'm happy to write you, explain that. I don't know what that has to do with climate change. The
Well,
subject of
it
this
has to
hearing.
do with your credibility. Did
As
you
a-
say, what is your basis for saying that Senator Graham is President Putin's? I mean, have you ever talked to President Putin?
I have not talked to President Putin, and I would be happy to go look at the tweet and look at the story that I tweeted out and what Senator Graham had said in that context. You know, this is something
you say all this stuff. For example, you're here as an expert for my Democratic friends, and you say all this stuff. You called on September 16, 2023, a professor at the University of Chicago, very distinguished professor, Brian Leiter. You called him a racist. Can you explain to me why you think he's a racist?
I remember a series of tweets with him. He's a Marxist who put out a number of statements attacking African Americans and women. And he also was raising money for someone who had called the police on a black student for sleeping in the common room, and now has a wokekkk.com website attacking
That's
me.
fair enough.
So
Fair enough.
I will just say one thing that I learned in high school debate, that when you have no argument, you simply change the subject.
All right. On October 15th of 2020, you said Lindsey Graham is soliciting cash payments in return for voting on a Supreme Court nomination. What evidence, that's a pretty bold statement, Professor. What evidence do you have for alleging that Senator Graham was taking cash in return for one of his votes?
I don't recall that specific tweet,
Here it
but
is,
I
right here.
do.
Here
I
it is.
do recall. And I
Do you think he
received-
was taking cash for one of his votes?
I have received campaign.
Do you think he was taking cash for one of his votes?
I'm answering your question, Senator. I have received solicitations from both political parties.
Do you think Lindsey Graham was taking
hearings
cash for
justice.
one of his votes? It's a simple question,
I have
Professor.
received cash, solicitations for cash on my email. And yes, from both political parties in connection with Supreme Court confirmation votes.
Well, I'm out
It's
of time,
wrong.
but let me just say for the
It's
record,
wrong.
my aunt's Facebook page has more credibility than you do. I could spend the rest of the day reading your quotes where you make allegations against people and you can't defend them.
You've said nothing about climate change. You quoted everybody from a Marxist
Senator
to
Kaye.
all sorts of other people. This has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of the hearing, Senator.
Ranking Member Grassley.
I have a point of personal privilege before I start my questioning. I want you to know that Senator Johnson and I were accused of spreading Russian disinformation for 2.5 years, and everybody now knows that we were not spreading Russian disinformation on an investigation that we were doing. Dr. Pelkey, you were fired from your position at 538. WikiLeaks later revealed an explicit campaign against you. The editor of Think Progress, a website that's part of the lobbying arm of a far left-wing Center for American Progress, wrote the following in an email to billionaire dark money Democrat donor Tom Steyer. Quote, I think it's fair to say that without Climate Progress, the environmental arm of Think Progress, Pilkey would still be writing on climate change for 538. Why do you believe you were fired from 538 and smeared in the media?
Yeah, thank you. I had written a piece. I was hired by Nate Silver to write for 538, and since climate change was so contested, I said, well, if you let me write some about sports, I'll also write about climate change. My first piece was to summarize an IPCC report. In 2012, the IPCC released a report, a special report on extreme events, and it was straight up IPCC consensus science that I wrote about. What I said in that piece was that disaster costs are increasing, but they're increasing because we have more stuff, more property, more buildings in harm's way. That's what the IPCC concluded. There was an organized campaign released years later, and you never know where you'll find yourself. I was in the WikiLeaks. And it was organized by Center for American Progress along with a climate scientist named Michael Mann. And they were very explicit why they wanted me to be removed. My message, even though it was on consensus science, was not politically comfortable or acceptable. So it was a very clear reason why I was attacked. My only regret is that the editors at 538 didn't stand firm and say we're going to support strong science.
Mr. Walter, witnesses called to testify before this committee this year by the majority work for organizations that have received dark money from Arabella Advisors. The president of the Niskanen Center even admitted on the record to receiving funding from anonymous donors in the past, but in 10 climate hearings, Democrats have never asked a single one of their witnesses about their receipts of dark money, let alone attempted to impugn the integrity or accuse them of conspiracy. Why do you think that is, and how does Arabella Advisors influence Democratic legislators, and why is the Democratic dark money conveniently ignored by the left?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I can't explain exactly why your colleagues aren't willing to look at the dark money ties of their own witnesses, because, of course, they're very extensive, and influencewatch.org, our website, would provide lots of information on that. Arabella is a stunningly powerful. It affects the executive branch, it affects regulations, it affects legislation, with, as I said, billions of dollars a year, some of it from foreign donors. Now, One of my favorite examples of this would be that almost the entire Biden regulatory agenda has been shaped by an especially dark bit of Arabella called Governing for Impact. Interestingly, that has ties to a witness that appeared at the last hearing where I had the honor of testifying to Chairman Whitehouse.
Are any Democratic witnesses on this panel linked to the web of liberal dark money donations?
Yes, just today you have a witness, for instance, who spent years at the group called Crew, which is tied to the dark money of Empire of David Brock and other dark money. You have a witness who's connected to a nonprofit that receives money from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is one of the donors tied up in the Arabella network.
Dr. WRECKS, the environmental law firm Scher Edling receives funding by way of the Resource Legal Fund and the Arabella Advisors New Venture Fund from foreign and domestic elites to promote progressive climate policies. Democratic dark money giant George Soros and Leonard DiCaprio are among their donors. Are you currently or have you ever been retained by the environmental law firm Scher Edling?
Yes, I have, and I welcome the opportunity to talk about the case that I consulted on, San Mateo versus Chevron, where the people of San Mateo County have sued for redress because of the damages that that county and the state of California is experiencing from sea level rise caused by climate change caused by their product, oil and gas.
My time's up. Thank you.